Welcome to this week's episode of the My Veterinary Life podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Annie Chavant, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm joined by our other co-host, Dr. Marcy Kirk.
Hi, everyone. My pronouns are also she, her, hers.
And our guest today is Dr. Julie Cappel. She's a life coach and a practicing small animal, avian, and exotic veterinarian. She's passionate about helping other veterinarians live abundant lives, and we can't wait to share her story with you. Before we welcome her in, we do want to quickly remind everyone that this episode is brought to you with support from our educational partner, IDEX, whose diagnostic and software solutions create clarity in the complex, constantly evolving world of veterinary medicine. And you can learn more at IDEX.com. And with that, welcome to the show, Dr. Cappel.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited that you all are having me on your podcast.
But we are excited and happy that you're here as well. We've got a lot of questions that we want to ask you today.
So we better hurry, right?
I love it. I love it. So let's start at the very beginning, like we do with every episode. What first sparked that interest for you in vet med?
Well, I was one of those kids that always loved animals. My mom is an animal fanatic, and she always wanted to be a cowboy when she was a kid and have horses. So she kind of probably genetically spilled that into me. But the real time that I remember is my sixth grade teacher. When I was in sixth grade, we had book reading assignments every week. We could pick our own book, and then we had to write a book report. And then we had to turn it in. And I remember my teacher calling me up to the desk one day, and she said, Julie, every book you read is about animals. You read about guide dogs and horses, and every single book you turn in. You should think about being a veterinarian when you grow up. And she said, by the time you grow up, a lot of women are going to be in it, or there'll be more women. And she kind of just put that idea in my head. And from pretty much that day forward, that's what I said I was going to do.
Okay, there is so much I love about that story because I feel like not only did that teacher lay the groundwork for veterinary medicine, which I think is incredible and so encouraging, especially when she's like, women are going to be doing this. I love that. Gave me chills. I'm not going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if she also sort of planted the seed for like coaching and helping other people, find their passion and everything, which we're going to find, along your journey. Cause it just seems like that was so impactful.
That's a really good light bulb thought, that maybe on some level, she coaching me gave me kind of that idea that I could coach others. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I love that.
You could support other people. So that's normally on the podcast, we go step by step in your career. You wear a lot of hats though, and you've worn a lot of hats. And so we kind of want to just look at high level. I mean, you've been a podcaster, or you are a podcaster, practice owner, coach. So if you could sort of, just give us a brief arc of how things went after vet school, a little bit of background, and then we'll really hit on to like what you're doing now.
Yeah, I graduated from vet school in 1988, so many, many years ago. And I just always wanted to be an owner. Before I went to vet school, I started working for a veterinarian in my neighborhood area that was a woman, one of the only women I know that started her own practice. And when she was opening her practice, I begged to get in there and it was before I was old enough to really even work, I think. Maybe I was in high school. But anyway, just having that desire to own my own practice, I think was spurred on by her. Her name is Dr. Kathy Morris. And she kind of encouraged me to be independent and get my own practice. So as soon as I got out of veterinary school, that was my goal. But I actually worked at another practice for a few years, got fired, which is a whole big story in and of itself, from my first job. And then I started working at the practice that I eventually owned. And I owned it for 23 years. And really loved that because I love leadership so much. I really love helping other people become the best they can be. And a way to do that was to be an owner and be able to allow my team to grow and flourish. And that's the kind of thing that gets me excited. So that's how I ended up getting into leadership. I worked on the board of the MVMA. I was on several boards, the local and the state. And that's kind of part of my being a leader. And so I did that while I owned my practice. But that's what excited me. And then when I started to get older and my kids were graduating, I was like, all right, I need another challenge. Like I had owned the practice. I had solved all the problems multiple times that you can have as an owner. And I was like, either I need to buy another practice and do this again, or I need to do something else. And I've always loved self-help. I've always loved, those kind of books and studying up on happiness science and, psychology and things like that. And I stumbled across life coaching. I started listening to a podcast and I was like, that is what veterinarians need. And so then I decided to go down that road. I'm kind of one of those people that likes to do a lot of things.
Wow. Yeah. That you really have maximized the options in the veterinary career and jumped into practice ownership fairly early as well. I know we hear some stats around new grads, recent grads being hesitant to embrace practice ownership for a variety of reasons. So I love that's part of your story of something that you knew that you wanted to do and then were willing to make that happen on a timeline that worked for you as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry. One of the reasons that I did that is because I wanted to have control of my life. Because I knew I wanted to be a mother. I knew I wanted to, do other things besides vet med. And, some of the board work and things like that were part of that. But I saw ownership as a way to give me freedom. And I think that's another reason I got into coaching is I want younger veterinarians to see that as an option. Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of hard work, but it definitely gives you a lot of freedom and autonomy, which I love.
Yeah, and I think that can be a huge value as well. If you're willing and comfortable to take on a little bit of risk, a little bit of unknown, the benefits can be huge with practice ownership. And especially if you're the kind of person that has that vision and knows how they want that practice to look like, what the culture is going to be. It's kind of fun to, I would imagine, I'm not a practice owner, but
I loved it.
I'm speaking to them of being able to kind of create your own and nurture people. And I'm sure that's kind of where some of your coaching ideas developed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started talking about life coaching, my daughter said to me, she said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, you'd be great at that because that's what you do anyway. You coach your team, you teach them leadership, you teach them to take care of themselves, you teach them, how to set boundaries, and that's kind of all that's included in life coaching." And so it kind of fit for me in a lot of ways. But I really do want I want veterinarians to understand the beautiful thing about this profession is the options. Like you can really do so many things and sometimes at the same time, because being an owner is definitely a lot of work, but you also can design the practice that you want. It can be as big or as small, as many employees as you want. You can let it grow huge. You can keep it small. It gives you options.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And if I may push a little on that initial experience after graduation. So you mentioned that you were fired from that first position.
Yeah, that was
What were some
really great life
takeaways
lesson.
there? Yeah. Like, what did you learn from that, and how did you move forward?
Yeah, well, the story was, I was the only woman in an all-male practice because that's kind of how it was when I got out of school. There were more men than women, kind of the flip side of what's going on now. And the owner of the practice was they were good veterinarians, but very much, I don't want to say anti-woman, but I don't even know why he hired me because he really didn't want women working at his practice. And he did some things that I didn't agree with ethically and morally. But I was young and I was too stupid to quit. Like I had the idea that I could fix it. I could change him if I just convinced him to my way of thinking, and so I pushed him. I was there for 3 years. And so I got to know him really well and he knew me. And, it wasn't the job that I was doing. It was more personality driven because I pushed back on the things I didn't agree with that he was doing that I didn't think were, ethical. And so I got myself fired, which was, at the time, tragic and embarrassing. And, you cry and you grieve, and, your dream job is now not yours anymore. I mean, that's how it felt. But as I gained clarity and as I started to recover from that tragedy and found a practice that better suited my personality and better suited my ethics, it was a great lesson. Like it was really good for me. It taught me that if somebody owns a practice, it's theirs to run, and you cannot change them or try to change their practice because it's their practice. And also it just taught me to, stick to what I believed in, because once I found the practice that fit for me, it was so much better. And instead of being embarrassed and, discouraged by being fired, like I had never been fired before, and I had worked a lot of jobs, I took it as kind of a badge of honor. Like that was good for me. It was great that it happened to me, and it gave me a lot of empathy for the people that I ultimately was their boss and I had to fire. I kind of knew how that was going to feel, and it sometimes made me a little soft with firing people, because I was like, oh, I'm going to destroy this person's life if I fire them. But I also think it made me a better leader, because I could coach them and say, look, you're going to get fired if you don't, think about this. And it allowed me to develop myself better, but also help me develop my team. So it ended up being a good thing in the long run.
Yeah, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that story. I know there are hard parts of anybody's career in vet med, and it can seem so intimidating of like I really don't want this bad thing to happen, or I'm just spending my career trying to avoid these pitfalls. But your perspective is so refreshing, and the empathy that you gain from walking through those difficult things personally, I mean, you can hear it in your tone and then what you did with that information moving forward with your own practice.
Yeah, it absolutely is good for you to have adversity. And it doesn't feel good. Like we all hate it. Like who wants to be fired and who wants to feel that disappointment in themselves? But it really ends up always being a lesson of things that you can either change about you if you were in the wrong. I could totally think that he was totally in the wrong and I was totally in the right. But in hindsight, I'm like, no, I pushed him. Like I was young and I thought I knew everything. And, like I tried to push him, and, he wasn't having it, especially from a woman. And I understood that. And I met him years later. In fact, his daughter became a veterinarian, which was really fascinating. And I met the two of them, and I told her that. I said, your dad fired me, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I wouldn't have ended up where I am. So, it is. If you can keep that in mind when something really terrible happens, that ultimately it's probably going to be the best thing for you, even though it hurts in the moment. I think that's so helpful.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, speaking about being a woman in vet med, I can't help but notice in your story that you pursued practice ownership at the same time that you're raising your children and also having leadership positions in your state and local veterinary medical associations. You mentioned the Michigan VMA. So
Right.
one of the advantages you said of practice ownership is having this flexibility and making your own schedule and making the practice kind of work for you. But what did that look like when you're balancing that many things?
Well, I can't say that I did it all well, right? Like we all make mistakes, and my kids, if you sat them down, they would tell you what I did wrong, and what I did right. Because they've shared, they didn't love daycare in the summer, especially, right? Because they had to go to latchkey daycare or whatever it was called. But the balancing part was difficult, but I just had this vision that if I was a stay-at-home mother and I quit vet med, that I'd never be happy and I wouldn't be the best mom. And I knew that if I was a working mom, I was setting an example for my kids of what hard work can do for you. I was basically living my dream, and I want my kids to live their dream. So although it was hard, and, I had to make some sacrifices, being an owner allowed me to schedule when I wanted to do things and how I wanted to do them. So my priority was my kids and my family, and the practice always kind of came second. And as all my employees. So if somebody had a show, like my kids are artists, so they had a lot of shows. If they had a show, if they had a trip, I did it all. And I was able to do that because I had other veterinarians working in my practice, so I could leave for extended periods of time. I might not make as much money because I wasn't there as much, but I was able to be with my kids and take them on cool vacations and take them to CE with me, which I did a lot. And so on some level, I'm sure they would say they missed out on a little bit, but I think that I did as much for them as I could and stuck with my authentic self, because I had a neighbor that was a stay-at-home mom, and she would judge me, that I wasn't home. And she even said one time, I don't want my daughter to be a doctor because I want her to stay home with her kids. And I said, well, that's totally a choice. You can be a doctor and stay home with your kids. Like there's nobody that says you can't. But I wanted to be the working person that also had kids and did a good job as a mom. So it wasn't easy. My kids spent time Sundays at the hospital, doing bookkeeping or whatever, playing with kittens. But, I drug them to CE. They went pretty much everywhere with me, and it worked because they're both very awesome humans now. They're wonderful people.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. And I think it is, I want to just key in on, it's a choice, right? We all have choices, and we make the choice that's right for us and right for our
Right.
family. And I also think seeing the leader of the clinic making those choices hopefully show that there's an environment that, like, we can work together. Like, my kid has a show this night, yours has one the next night. Let's see how we can make this work together
Right.
for everyone. And it's just
Yep.
it feels like a safer opportunity to have those discussions. And
Right.
not to say that people who don't have kids can't be great leaders too. It's just that those conversations and that empathy and making sure
Right.
that everyone has that opportunity.
Right. And bringing kids to work. I mean, I don't know how many times we had children at the hospital for a meeting, or they had to stay home sick, but they weren't that sick. So they were sleeping on the office floor, or, I mean, it happened. But I think that that's really the key is realizing that work is work and home is home. And, if your kid has a performance or a sporting event, or, those are all important things to be, because they are only with you a short time. And I can say that at my age now, that 18 years, it seems like drudgery as you're going through it. It's difficult, but it actually goes by really fast. And
What's
you don't
that
want to miss
saying?
any of it.
The days are long, but the years are short. Isn't that?
Yeah,
That's
I
a
just
saying,
heard
right?
that the other day somewhere. Yeah, somebody said that. But it's so true. I went to all the band camps. I went to all the events. I really was able to do so much that had I not been the owner, I don't know that I would have been able to do. And then I allowed my veterinarians to do the same for their kids.
Mhm.
You know.
I really think that's incredible to just kind of talk about, like, yeah, again, we just need to have those conversations about what's possible.
Right.
So speaking also then of choice, we talked at the beginning that you listened to podcasts, you really got into self-help and happiness, science and coaching. And so how did you decide which coaching certificates were the ones for you? Like, what did that process look like for you to kind of get that started?
Yeah, that's a hard one because life coaching isn't regulated, and there's a million different ways to do it. In fact, you can be a life coach with no certifications whatsoever. But I didn't feel like I had that talent. In fact, when I went through my coaching certification, I had been a boss for so long. My first instinct was to tell people what to do rather than coach them, because I coached my employees, but I was really good at telling people, oh, well, this will probably work, and the people that were teaching me life coaching are like, she would say to me, she'd be like, wait a minute, you can't tell them what to do. She'd say to me all the time, Julie, you can't tell them what to do. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So it was a little bit of a struggle. I just looked at a bunch of programs, and the program that I went through was a year-long program. I wanted something that was substantial, but not to the point where it was going to keep me from moving forward. And I figured once I got that life coaching certification, I went to the life coach school. And that's kind of how I learned about life coaching in the first place, is I stumbled across her podcast and I liked the way she described things. I went through that program with 10 other people in my class and learned a ton by coaching coaching people for free and doing all that. And then once I got that certification, I started doing other things like the compassion fatigue certification, which I really wanted to have a good handle on for my veterinarians. And then I just recently went through a mindfulness course. It was kind of long. And I have a hard time sitting still. So for me, that's a challenge, but it was really taught me a lot of things about mindfulness and what it means to be in the moment and really listening and paying attention, which because I'm easily distracted, I need to be mindful. But so I don't know that there was a lot of scientific thought that went into it other than I'm a very feeling person. So when something feels authentic to me, that's kind of where I gravitate.
Yeah, that's helpful to hear because I can only imagine how intimidating it must be to make the decision, I want to be involved in coaching. And then there's this wide buffet of options and different certifications and then different people within those certifications to kind of train with and learn.
Right.
But I also liked the thought process that you had too of, I want something that I feel like it is substantive, but also not all consuming.
Right.
And I don't want to put my life on pause to get this training as well.
And I was still working at the time when I started
Yeah.
doing that. I was still working pretty much full time, maybe 30 hours, but I was still working. So I needed to do something that I could do on my downtime and when I was able, and it worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Now, I would also be remiss to not mention that in addition to the coaching and your ownership experience, you also have been working on a book for a little bit now, and it's recently published. So
Yes.
I'm imagining that's a little bit of kind of the culmination of some of your coaching experiences and that kind of thing. And we love the title here on the My Veterinary Life podcast because it is called Love Your Veterinary Life. So can you explain for us kind of like how was the experience of publishing your first book?
Well, it's interesting because it's something that I always thought was cool, right? I love to read, but I thought, wouldn't it be cool to be a writer? Well, when I was in junior high, one of my teachers told me I wasn't a good writer. Not in that, they're not in so many words, but that's what stuck, is that you're not good at writing. And so my whole life, I never wrote unless I absolutely had to. And the interesting thing is once I started to learn about life coaching and they were saying, look, you can do anything you want to do. You just have to get out of your head. You have to open up, like I knew I could be an owner. I knew I could raise kids. Like I was confident in that, but I wasn't confident in writing. And so getting life coached myself made me realize that my story that I wasn't a good writer was holding me back. And I always wanted to write a book and I wanted to do it. So I really had to push myself away from that mindset. And I started blogging. And I forced myself every Sunday at midnight, you have to have a blog out and just put it out into the world. I have a blogger site and I just would put it out there. And it was about life coaching because I was already starting to do that and about vet med. And I just pushed myself. And then I was like, okay, now I got to write the book. Now I've got all these blogs and I can use some of that material. Like I was already writing little snippets here and there, but it was a slog. And it took me probably 2.5 to 3 years to kind of like pull it all together with help, from my husband, kind of helped me organize it and an editor. And then getting over that fear of putting it out there because, it might be terrible. That's what your brain tells you. Like that book's going to be awful. And I think it turned out well, but getting over your brain holding you back and that fear of failure is really the key. And that's why I love life coaching so much because it got me from lifelong thinking I couldn't write to, and now I write all the time. I blog, I write for magazines. I wrote the book, which came out in September. And I'm going to write another one. I've got like 3 or 4 ideas of different books I want to write. So, and I can contribute or attribute that all to the life coaching. It just gave me the idea that I could do it.
I love how that just unlocked a potential in there. And what a smart way to go about it. The blogging, and then you had some source material, you had a lot of practice. That's so smart.
Yeah.
So as we're sort of wrap up here, I want to make sure we hit on one more thing, that probably some listeners have maybe debated coaching and not sure where to start or not followed through. So who's a good candidate, and what would you say to them if they're thinking about coaching and how to find one?
Well, I think all humans are good candidates for coaching. And I don't say that just because I'm a coach. It really helps you unlock. And I still, to this day, after I've been coaching 7 years now, I think 6 or 7 years, I get coached myself, especially if I'm struggling with something that I want to do. And I'm like, okay, for some reason I'm procrastinating, or for some reason I'm not feeling confident, then I'll go back to coaching. And so I think every human can benefit from it on some level, whether it's, you're dealing with really heavy feelings from your past, like anxiety and, stress at work, conflict, leadership. There's so many things that life coaching can cover. And it basically can help you in all aspects of your life. So if you have something that you've always wanted to do and you find yourself not doing it, like me in my book, life coaches can help you get over that fear. It's just such a great tool. And I really think everyone should be coached. Like if I could get everybody a life coach, and it doesn't have to be for years, it can be periodic, but either coaching or even therapy. If, therapy is a little different than coaching, because therapy helps you deal with your past and kind of unravel all of that. And coaching kind of takes you from where you are today and pushes you forward. So it helps, like with me, with my book, it's like I had a story from my past, but I needed to get over that and go forward. And so coaching really helped me with that. So it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I really think it's great for everyone. And it is scary at first because you're a little vulnerable, right? To tell your story. Like I got fired when I was, 3 years out of vet school, and, my teacher told me I couldn't write. Like that stuff's kind of vulnerable. But there's so much power in getting it out there and letting it go, and then being like, oh, well, that's all human. Like we all have those stories. We all have fears. We all have, we look like we have it all together on the outside, but we don't. And coaches can help you get it more together, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great kind of picture to paint of one, not only that everybody's qualified, right? We're all human, but specifically how coaching can help. And I love the way that you said that of if you've got a dream that you're just not pursuing, like let's dig into that and let's figure out what some of those roadblocks are and let's get you there. So I can imagine that obviously everybody would benefit from that. We all dream big as veterinarians, and so really cool to be able to hear you provide that perspective, both from somebody who's been coached and then also provides coaching. So
yeah, it's your normal human brain. It makes you afraid. Like
yeah,
that's what our brain does. It does it on purpose. So if you can have someone help you get over that, you can really do whatever you want to do. It's just, it opens up all the possibilities. If you want to be an owner, if you want to change jobs, if you want to raise a family, if you want to find a spouse, like there's all these things that we're afraid of that a coach can help you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Cappel, Julie, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story and inspiring us and our listeners. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. It was a lot of fun.
Good. Great to hear. And thank you to each of you for joining us on this episode of the My Veterinary Life podcast. We love sharing this journey with you. And so remember, we want to hear from you. So please be sure to leave us a ratings and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen to. And you can also email us at mvlpodcast@avma.org. Take care, dream big, and we'll see you next time.